This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 16. Welcome to the 16th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. Please stop by the blog and leave a comment if you enjoyed today's show. I love hearing from you. You'll find the show notes for today's episode and all the podcast episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at FertileFriday. So please tweet me also if you enjoyed today's show. And I'm very excited to welcome Lily Nichols to the show today. Lily is a registered dietitian and nutritionist. She's a certified diabetes educator, a certified leap therapist, and a certified Pilates instructor. But Lily isn't your typical nutritionist. Her approach isn't about following a strict meal plan or counting calories, but rather she's focused on supporting women to embrace real food and learn to trust their bodies. Because in her own words, you can never maintain the body you want eating food you hate, which I totally agree with. One of the areas she focuses on is supporting pregnant women to have the healthiest pregnancy possible, and more specifically, supporting women with gestational diabetes to control their condition with real food. And Lily has recently released her new book, Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Lily.
Thanks so much for having me, Lisa.
Oh, thanks so much for being here. So I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit more about your background, what led you to focus on gestational diabetes in particular, and what inspired you to write your book.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of start from the beginning. This is something I shared in a blog post long ago, was that I knew I wanted to study nutrition from a pretty young age. And I got this scholarship to help pay for some books in college. And when I was giving the acceptance speech, I was talking about how I was going to change the school lunch policy so we'd have less childhood obesity. And I was, really, the statistics were starting to hit with rates of diabetes and overweight and obesity in children. And I was like, oh my gosh, we got to do something about this. Well, fast forward after I've, finished college, already, went through my first job and left that job, and an opportunity came up to work with the California Diabetes and Pregnancy Program. And I mean, I knew a little bit about gestational diabetes, but not nearly as much. It wasn't my entire focus when I had worked in the hospitals. And so it was there that I learned that gestational diabetes can impact a child's likelihood to have weight problems or blood sugar problems or even heart disease at a younger age, because what the environment they're exposed to as they're growing, specifically if they're exposed to high blood sugar, it can change their metabolism for the rest of their life. It can turn certain genes on that make them more likely to have diabetes and some of these problems. And it was like, bingo, like I've hit the jackpot. This is always something that's lit me up. And if we can do it through, helping pregnant women, I mean, you're preventing it before it starts. I mean, the statistics are really crazy. It's like kids born to moms with gestational diabetes that hasn't been controlled have a 6-fold higher risk of diabetes and becoming overweight at adolescence. And I was like, what in the world?
That's huge.
It's huge. And so, we can throw all this money at school lunch policy, which, like, are the kids even going to eat the food? Like, how healthy is it actually going to be? We can force kids into, doing all sorts of additional exercise, and it's like we're chasing our tail. It doesn't get to the root cause. So because this is such a big deal, I got really involved in gestational diabetes research, the public policy, and then also worked clinically with a perinatologist who specializes in gestational diabetes. So I could kind of see firsthand how the traditional recommendations, dietary recommendations for these women worked and how it didn't work, of course. And I've just kind of gone on from there.
Okay, well, let's get right into it then. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what gestational diabetes is. You mentioned a bit, but maybe get into it a little more so that the listeners have a better idea of what it is.
Sure. Yeah, so gestational diabetes, it has the word gestational in there, so you know it means during pregnancy. It's either diabetes that develops during pregnancy or is first diagnosed during pregnancy, which can mean different things. I'll get into it. But essentially, there is the way that our blood sugar is controlled. When our blood sugar goes up, our body gets the signal to release insulin to bring the blood sugar back down. In pregnancy, naturally, there's the development of something called insulin resistance, where, and you probably have touched on this in other podcasts since you're talking about infertility a lot, right? But
Mm-hmm.
when you're insulin resistant, your body isn't able to respond to the insulin that you have and keep your blood sugars down. So another way to describe gestational diabetes is insulin resistance during pregnancy, or even carbohydrate intolerance during pregnancy, since carbohydrates tend to be the foods that raise our blood sugars the most. So if you're intolerant to carbohydrates, your body isn't able to maintain normal blood sugar if you eat a diet that contains a lot of them. Um, so that's kind of the gist. Um, so gestational diabetes is a little bit complicated because, I mean, traditionally we screen for it sort of later in pregnancy at around 24 to 28 weeks. But something that I want to touch on briefly is that um, gestational diabetes can be identified actually a lot earlier in pregnancy. They can screen for it in the first trimester with a test called A1C, or hemoglobin A1C. And they've found that one study in particular was looking at A1C, and then they'd test women later in pregnancy and be like, okay, does early pregnancy blood sugar play any role in, what we're going to see on the glucose tolerance test later on? And so A1C shows your average blood sugar over the last 2 to 3 months approximately. So they screened these women and then they screened them later in their pregnancy. And the women who had an A1C of 5.9 or greater, which is in the pre-diabetic range, it predicted the development of gestational diabetes 98.4% of the time. So it was like, yes,
Yeah.
maybe if we screened earlier, we could catch some of this stuff and let women, make some changes to their diet ahead of time so they're not, having high blood sugars for two-thirds of their pregnancy before they even know, it's an issue, right? So that's just a little aside.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, so from what you're saying, they do test for gestational diabetes kind of standard, but they
Mhm.
don't do it until, like you said, 24 to 28 weeks. But what
Correct.
you're saying is that you could screen for this in the first trimester, and it predicts this 98% of the time. Do you have any, I guess, thoughts on why they might not be screening it? Is it an oversight or?
Well, I mean, sadly, a lot of the way that our uh, diseases I hate to call it a disease really, but a lot of the way that things are diagnosed, we have to come up with certain number thresholds. So the way that we diagnose diabetes or even prediabetes, for example, is kind of arbitrary. It's a certain amount above normal blood sugar that they happen to call it whatever they call it,
Mm,
prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And a lot of it actually has to do with the cost of caring for women who have gestational diabetes. There simply aren't enough nutritionists or dietitians trained in it. Um, there was questions about, is it worth it to treat quote unquote mild gestational diabetes?
mm.
Um, there's questions on, should you bother screening early and then have women spend all this time and money checking their blood sugar their whole pregnancy rather than do it later? Because usually insulin resistance is at its peak um, later in pregnancy. But there have been some really good studies that do show that even mildly elevated blood sugar in pregnancy is not good. There's a study called the HAPO study, hyperglycemia and adverse pregnancy outcomes study. And that one in particular, it was over, let me get the statistics right. It was with over 23,000 women with gestational diabetes across many different countries. It's the largest study of its kind. Anyways, they found that even mildly elevated blood sugars were linked to problems in the infants. Specifically, the infants were born with high insulin levels because
Mm.
their bodies, being exposed to high sugar, get the signal like, yes, you need to make insulin to bring these down. And they were also born larger than compared to women who had lower levels of blood sugar. So it's just going to be a time thing. I mean, how serious do we think it is? There's always going to be controversy in the research on whether or not it should be treated. I think there's pretty good evidence to diagnose it early and treat it early. And certainly, since I worked with a perinatologist that specializes in this, I mean, that's how we screened all of our women. We did very few glucose tolerance tests because we caught it early in most of our ladies. Our rates of macrosomia, being like the babies that are born larger than normal, was very low. The rates of our babies requiring a stay in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, for low blood sugar or breathing problems or any of that was very, very low. So I've seen it, I've seen it in the research reduce problems. I've seen it clinically reduce problems. I think it just becomes a battle of uh, politics and money, really, whether they're going to change what's standard.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a lot. I think it's kind of like an overarching, I don't know if you'd say philosophy with kind of standard medical practice, but there seems to be this kind of, well, it's not really an illness until it's really bad.
Yes.
And then it's an illness, and then we deal with it. But given what you said, I mean, this is something that, so the tests that you're saying that can be done in the first trimester, is that like a simple blood test, or is it involved? Is it something that's...
It's very simple. Yeah, it doesn't even require fasting. So it's literally for providers. It's a little check in the box for hemoglobin A1C. If they're drawing first trimester labs anyways, they could just add it to the list. And almost every lab has the ability to check A1C. Some doctors even have in-office A1C tests. They're not quite as accurate as when you send it out to the lab, but they're a pretty good estimate. So yeah, simple.
Okay, well, you've kind of touched on some of the risks to mom and baby, but maybe we could go into that a little bit more. So when gestational diabetes isn't treated properly, or when the insulin resistance is at a really high level, what are some of the negative outcomes that mom can experience and that baby can experience?
hmm I'll speak to the baby part at first. And so I already shared the macrosomia thing. So the baby's being born large at birth. So, like I said, if they're exposed to high blood sugar, their pancreas will start producing insulin. Insulin is not only is the hormone that lowers your blood sugar, but it tells your body what to do with that sugar. Once it's taken it out of your bloodstream, where does it go? Well, your body converts it into fat. So the babies are born, you can actually see it on third trimester ultrasounds. They're born with like a thicker fat mass around their middle. And it's not like the good fat. Like, you want a baby who's robust and healthy, but having a really thick layer of fat actually isn't so great. Anyways, these babies can also be born with very large shoulders. They can grow disproportionately large, and that can make it difficult to actually birth the baby.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately for a lot of women can lead their doctors to suggesting C-sections, which is, not my favorite thing in the world, but if the shoulders do get stuck, there can be some problems. So there can be the clavicle can get broken during delivery. There could be potentially even neurological damage to the infant. It could be, a medical emergency for the mom. They might have to do an emergency procedure. So that can be serious. And then there's also jaundice is more common in these infants, and hypoglycemia at birth is more common. And just to explain the hypoglycemia thing, you would think, like, why would the baby's blood sugar be low? Because they've been getting so much blood sugar the whole time. But you have to remember that their metabolism, their insulin levels are primed to see this constant supply of sugar coming into their little bodies. So I mean, very literally cut the cord and you're cutting off that sugar supply, but their insulin levels are still revved up, expecting a consistent supply. So they can have hypoglycemia at delivery, and sometimes that'll require a stay in the NICU. Sometimes these babies will have underdeveloped lungs because high blood sugar can interfere with lung development as well. So those are the short-term birth issues. For the mom, gestational diabetes is usually correlated with a lot of other problems during pregnancy, specifically preeclampsia, or the high blood sugar that develops. Swelling is more common in these women. Also risk for requiring a C-section, usually because the baby might grow too large, or the doctors are just afraid that the baby is too large, so they push one on them anyways. And then the carryover effects on both mom and baby kind of mirror each other. Women who have gestational diabetes have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes later in their life, quite a bit higher actually. So there are it's not just this, yes, the blood sugar tends to go down after delivery, sometimes all the way to normal, but there is a lifetime higher risk of developing diabetes. So over time, unless there's, some good changes in their lifestyle, you'll usually see the blood sugar ramp up, and sometimes to pre-diabetic or diabetic levels.
Well, those are some serious consequences for both mom and baby. So this is obviously something that we should be talking about more. I just had one question about, you said that there's an increased risk for preeclampsia. So for anyone who's not aware of what that is, could you just kind of touch on what that is?
Yes. So preeclampsia is a combination of things that a pregnant woman might experience. It usually involves high blood pressure is the main thing. And there's also some other things that they'll test for, like you'll usually spill protein in the urine. And sometimes having preeclampsia can interfere with the nutrient delivery to the baby. So sometimes they get concerned that women with high blood pressure will have actually small babies, so the opposite problem. So the easiest way to describe it is high blood pressure, but there's additional things that go along with it.
Okay.
To be classified as preeclampsia.
And I could kind of see some listeners thinking to themselves, well, this is all very nice, but this isn't going to happen to me, or this doesn't apply to me. So maybe we could talk about how prevalent is it, and maybe what are some of the risk factors?
Yes. And this is huge because now that we're re-looking at how we diagnose it, if we get really proactive about screening for gestational diabetes, will likely, this is what the research predicts, have 18% of pregnant women get diagnosed with gestational diabetes.
Wow.
Already, it's the most common complication of pregnancy. You're more likely to have gestational diabetes than you are to have high blood pressure during pregnancy, or any of these other, strange things that can happen while you're pregnant. So it's quite common. Some of the risk factors for a mom developing it, like I said, there's these, if a woman comes into pregnancy with some level of insulin resistance, she's more likely to develop gestational diabetes when you go back to that A1C screening thing, right? So if there is a family history of gestational diabetes, prediabetes, or type 2 diabetes in her family, meaning moms, grandparents, uncles, aunts, siblings, they're more likely to get it. If they are overweight at conception, it's also more likely to happen. If they are older, it's more likely to happen. All these things have to do really with your risk of insulin resistance ahead of time. Also, if you've had a large baby previously, so some women, they maybe passed their glucose screening, or maybe weren't tested in a previous pregnancy, but their baby was, 10 pounds. That generally makes them more likely to get diagnosed with gestational diabetes the next pregnancy. And then the final thing, and a lot of these things are kind of out of our control, right? So it's a little bit frustrating probably to be listening to this list. But the final thing is that our ethnic background plays a role in our risk as well. So just like there's a higher risk of diabetes in a bunch of different cultures, The same holds true for gestational diabetes. So we see higher rates in women of Hispanic descent, African American descent, Asian, Indian, Pacific Islander, Alaska Native. They all have higher rates of gestational diabetes than a Caucasian woman.
Okay. That's good to know because then a lot of those things you said, a lot of us have at least one or two of those risk factors. So definitely, and 18% is kind of close to one in five. So
It's kind of high. And then
it's
I'll
kind of
throw this
high.
in there because they've actually shown up to 50% of women with gestational diabetes don't have any of these traditional risk factors. So
Hmm.
just the natural changes that happen to a pregnant woman's metabolism, the weight gain, the insulin levels going up, combined with the insulin resistance, sometimes it's just a hormonal thing that's completely out of your control. So aside from, eating really well and trying to maintain a normal weight before you get pregnant, the rest is kind of up in the air. I mean, there's some research on, healthy eating and not smoking and exercising, and having normal vitamin D levels. Those can all help prevent gestational diabetes. Aside from that, sometimes it's just, you know, your your deck of cards that you're dealt.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know one of the guests that I had on, Laura Bryden, she's a naturopathic doctor that focuses on hormones. She talked a lot about the link between insulin resistance and PCOS. And so, is there a link between gestational diabetes or susceptibility for it and infertility?
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly the reason. It's the insulin resistance. So, not every woman with PCOS is going to have insulin resistance. So, we have to keep that in mind. There's some types of PCOS that aren't specifically related to insulin, but I would say the majority of the time it does play a role. So, if you already know that PCOS is going on or some insulin resistance is going on, again, which you can screen pretty easily for with an A1C, or that's one way to do it. You can take steps to help manage that, to help get your blood sugar in better control.
Okay. Um, yeah, it sounds like that would be really important even before when you're trying to get pregnant. Just
Right.
one of the things that I wanted to ask you about actually was because well, I guess we haven't really gotten into what to do about it.
hmm
So maybe we should get into that actually before I ask this question. I may as well ask a different question. So, when a woman is diagnosed with gestational diabetes, what are some of the things that she can do to bring her insulin levels back to normal, her blood sugar levels back to normal, and is she going to need medication?
Sure. Um, well, I'll first tell you that uh, the insulin levels that are the higher insulin levels natural result of pregnancy. So that isn't probably isn't going to go down. What we can do is change the types of foods that she's eating or the proportions of certain foods that she's eating so we don't overstimulate insulin production.
Mm,
So don't make the blood sugar go so high that the body has to pump out even more insulin that it's already making at capacity. So the first thing I would have a woman do is to start measuring her blood sugar. So usually when a woman gets diagnosed with gestational diabetes, their doctor is going to give them a glucose meter. It's called a glucometer sometimes. So they can use the glucometer plus these little blood sugar strips. You simply prick your finger, push out a little drop of blood, put it on your glucometer, and you see where your levels are at. So most doctors are having women check their blood sugar fasting, which is first thing in the morning, and then after each meal. There's controversy over whether it should be 1 hour or 2 hour, but regardless, checking your blood sugar at a consistent time after each meal, and then you can kind of see where you're at, where you need to make adjustments. The primary treatment is food and exercise. And then the final thing, if those two aren't enough, is medicine. So, how likely is it that a woman will require medicine or insulin to lower your blood sugar? It It really varies. I think the number of women requiring insulin and medication could be lower if we change the standard of care for the nutrition for gestational diabetes, which is the whole reason that I wrote my book. But it's pretty standard to have about 40% of women, quote unquote, fail diet therapy and need to have the help of a little bit of medicine and insulin.
And is that following kind of the standard recommendations, having
That
40%?
would, yeah, that would be following the standard recommendations. So, yeah, so usually that's a what I consider a fairly high carbohydrate diet because there's all sorts of controversy around carbohydrates in pregnancy. Generally pretty low fat, which I disagree with, which we can get into. And you know, it isn't as much focused on real food. So a lot of times the normal standards are purely focused on get this number of carbohydrates in this meal, keep your fat low, and then monitor your blood sugar. And if your blood sugar is high, well, you're following the guidelines. We can't lower your carbohydrates much more, so you're gonna need medicine to lower it. That's kind of just the way of the gestational diabetes world so far. I think if we focus, there's a lot of nutrients that play a role in blood sugar management, and that's something that I get into in the book, and that we have to look like, yes, carbohydrates matter, and yes, it's safer to go lower in carbohydrates, which has a whole chapter to itself. But also, if we focus our efforts on real food that provides some of these nutrients that naturally help to manage the blood sugar, and when foods are less processed, they tend to spike our blood sugar a lot less, then we wouldn't have as many of these women requiring medicine.
Okay. So when you're working with a woman who has been diagnosed with gestational diabetes, I guess let's get into, I guess, some of the foods you'd be recommending, or even in terms of like, what shouldn't she be eating? What should she be eating? I guess kind of a back to basics. Because I think to myself, like, what do most people eat? A lot of people feel they're eating healthy, but what I think is
Yeah.
healthy is different to what you think is healthy. Everyone thinks healthy is different. So,
Yeah, we all have these different definitions, you're right. And unfortunately, you know, our US dietary guidelines are a little um, behind the times of nutrition research. They haven't embraced all the current literature. Although I just heard that the newest dietary guidelines might be dropping recommendations on cholesterol. So they might, you know how they always say you need to limit your cholesterol intake to 300 milligrams per day. It sounds like they're going to be doing away with that because we've known for 30 plus years that actually I think we're going on 40 or 50 plus years in the research that dietary cholesterol doesn't really change our blood cholesterol. So anyways, the first thing, I like to keep it really, really simple. So the first thing they need to understand is how food affects their blood sugar. That is the number one. Now, every woman's blood sugar is different. All of us respond to food differently. You could give me the exact same meal as you have, and we could check our blood sugar before and after the meal, and the numbers would be different. We would probably be starting at a different pre-meal blood sugar. We'd probably end the meal at a different blood sugar because all of our bodies have a different response to whatever combination of foods we've had. But in general, so that's why I'm always getting people to check their blood sugar first and get an understanding of where you're at and then make these changes. So in general, the foods that raise our blood sugar the most are carbohydrates because carbohydrates essentially are like long chains of sugar. It's like little chain links of sugar all linked together. And as we digest them, our body uses enzymes to cleave off those little chain links and the individual sugars get absorbed and our blood sugar goes up. It's really as simple as that. And it's a lot more complex than that too. But that's the easiest way to think about it. So the foods that contain the most carbohydrates are the ones that raise the blood sugar the most. The processed carbohydrates are going to be the worst offenders. That's like the white flour, the white sugar, even anything that's labeled as instant. So like instant rice, instant noodles, instant mashed potatoes. I memean, they're instant because they cook up really fast. I mean, you get like a thing of um, a cup of ramen or like what do they call it? Top noodle. You pour in the hot water and your noodles are instantly cooked. I mean, how did that happen? I mean, if you just have to add water to it, that is like pure pure starch, pure carbohydrates, and that stuff spikes your blood sugar even faster than sugar itself, like table sugar.
Hmm.
So the really refined carbohydrates are the worst ones. And then even the naturally occurring carbohydrates in foods will raise the blood sugar too. So even your whole grains are going to raise your blood sugar, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans and legumes, fruit, and milk and yogurt will be the main sources of carbohydrates in our diet. So it's really important that women start to understand how many carbohydrates are in those foods. So when they eat them, they know how much they can eat without having high blood sugar after the meal. And the degree to which women are going to have to restrict the carbohydrates is really going to depend on where their blood sugar levels are at.
Hmm. So I'm guessing like Cheerios and cornflakes and all the typical things we eat for breakfast. Well, not we, but as a culture, I guess. Because I don't know. For me personally, like I've had different breakfasts over the years,
Yep.
and I used to eat oatmeal every day, and it's so funny because it just did that because it was just what we did in my house, and I would be hungry 30 minutes later.
Hmm.
And so really, I'm my own little experiment, but until I started making sure that I was eating like protein and fat, so maybe some eggs with maybe some meat or some sardines or something like that for breakfast, that's the only time when I really get satiated for a period of time. So maybe maybe we could just maybe we could talk about the role that fat plays in this process because I still
Yes.
can't even actually I went to the States for my brother's wedding, and I'm just going to tell this random story because I just can't get over it. So I'm in the States and we were just there for like the weekend, and I was trying to just go to the grocery store to get just a few things so I could give my son some food. And I couldn't find yogurt that had any fat in it. Like
Mm.
not even like 1%, like it was all 0%. So I ended up finding a Whole Foods, and it was only there that I could even find like cheese.
Wow.
It was nuts.
I know Americans are crazy fat phobic still.
Yeah, like it, because even like in a Canadian supermarket, there is the option of 0%, but you can always find 2% or
Yeah.
something. But there was none, and so I don't know what's going on down there.
Terrible. It's terrible. Um, okay, well, first of all, you're totally speaking my language, and I have a lot of things to say about the breakfast thing. First off, I'll say you're genius because paying attention to our bodies, I'm really into mindful eating, and paying attention to our body's hunger and fullness cues usually tells us a lot about our blood sugar. Because
Mm,
if our when our blood sugar is either low or is dropping really fast, our body sees that as an emergency and goes, "Holy cow, this girl needs to get some energy in there." And it'll make you hungry and make you want to eat. So if you eat something and you're hungry 30 minutes later, unless you ate like a teeny bit, like if we're talking a normal amount of food, like, oatmeal for breakfast, and you are hungry 30 minutes later, that means your blood sugar spiked and then it dropped down really quickly, and your body's hungry again and needs more fuel. So that's probably not an ideal breakfast. You're exactly right. And for a woman with gestational diabetes specifically, blood sugar levels tend to be the hardest to control in the morning. So the body is naturally more insulin resistant in the morning. There's a surge in hormones from the placenta. There's also a surge in cortisol that all of us, pregnant or not, experience that both contribute to more insulin resistance. Meaning, if you eat the usual really high carb breakfast, like the cornflakes and milk and a glass of orange juice or something, your blood sugar levels are going to skyrocket. And no matter how hard your pancreas is trying to pump out insulin, it's your blood sugar is not going to want to go down very quickly. So a lot of times women have to be even more careful with the amount of carbs they're eating in the morning. And in lieu of eating a ton of carbs, if you get a really good source of fat and protein in the morning, you tend to be much more satiated, So you're not hungry as soon. It doesn't spike your blood sugar, so you have normal blood sugar after the meal, and it can actually change your likelihood to eat as much or overeat rather later in the day. So they've done a bunch of studies on eggs specifically and comparing them to bagels or comparing them to croissants. And people eat around 30% less throughout the rest of the day without even thinking about it. These are in one study that gave people access to an all-you-can-eat buffet and gave them different breakfasts and then saw how they did later in the day. You give eggs, people naturally eat a lot less. So fat and protein are absolutely crucial. Well, they're the building blocks of a human being, so we should be eating them during pregnancy. But B, they don't spike the blood sugar. So eggs in the morning are fantastic. Like a breakfast sausage scramble thingy with different vegetables would be a fantastic thing in the morning. If they're doing dairy, a Greek yogurt and full fat too, please, full fat. Would be fantastic. That gives you a bunch of fat and protein. Something that involves nuts or nut butter, or cheese or cottage cheese. If you like sardines in the morning, go for it. A leftover dinner that has some meat or a good source of protein in there. Those are all fantastic breakfasts, and they make a really good replacement for the usual cereal and milk or juice or fruit smoothie or something like that.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like it's like we got to take out the carbs, but we're not just taking them out and expecting you to be hungry and unhappy. We're replacing it with healthy fats, healthy protein, vegetables, but just other foods that don't have that same impact on your blood sugar because they're not just straight up simple carbs.
Right. And that's the biggest problem with the traditional recommendations is if even if you're eating a pretty high carb diet before you get diagnosed with gestational diabetes, so the conventional recommendations are a slight lowering of carbohydrates. If you take out the carbs and you don't replace it with anything, then you're basically starving, and that's no good. You got to get your calories from somewhere, and we can only eat so much protein. So usually, the thing we need to eat more of actually is fat. And I want to say, not every woman needs to eliminate all carbohydrates. That's also a big misconception. You could take it too far in either direction. So some women will do quite well still having a little bit of carbohydrates with their meals, just in an appropriate amount. But I try to really emphasize the foods that are, I guess you could say, less dense in carbohydrates. So the non-starchy vegetables like, I don't know, green beans, broccoli, celery, zucchini, tomatoes, those all contain some carbohydrates. They just don't contain quite as much as something like corn or a sweet potato or something. But they still contain carbohydrates. Berries are fantastic. They're full of so many nutrients. They aren't as sweet. They aren't as concentrated in carbohydrates. They have a lot more fiber, a lot more antioxidants. The Greek yogurt gives you, tons of calcium and goodness, but has, half the carbs and a lot more protein than regular yogurt or a glass of milk, right? So it's about making smart replacements, but you're still consuming some carbohydrates, just so women don't go too crazy on this.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've touched on this a little bit, but I'm still going to ask the question because you've talked a little bit about how the recommendations in your book differ from kind of the standard recommendations. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how your recommendations differ from how women are generally treated by nutritionists when they have gestational diabetes.
Yes. And, it's fantastic that women with gestational diabetes usually get referred to a nutritionist because it's a really unique opportunity. I mean, pregnant women are like the most motivated group of people in the world to eat well. I mean, if you know something's going to impact your baby, and especially if you don't have the nicest doctor who's been like, gestational diabetes, your blood sugar's too high, baby's going to be fill in the blank problem, a lot of women are willing to do like anything. So the traditional recommendations for gestational diabetes, I have a couple problems with them. The biggest one is the carbohydrate level. they set a minimum level of carbohydrates that pregnant women should consume. And this is based on the US Institute of Medicine recommendations. They set the minimum at 175 grams of carbohydrates per day. That's one thing. The second problem is the fat level. They're usually suggesting a low-fat diet, and it's really difficult to do a low-fat diet and a low-carbohydrate diet at the same time. So a lot of moms end up being, very hungry. They're restricted in food. They're missing out on life. And if you're cutting fat out, I mean, fat gives everything amazing flavor. So, we're not doing butter. We're doing, skimmed milk. We're doing, lean beef. We're doing eggs without the yolks, which is absolute criminy to me because there's tons of really useful nutrients for a growing baby and egg yolks that are difficult to get in other places. So those are the two biggest issues. To just go back to the carbohydrate thing, though, as far as I'm aware, I'm the first person who's really looked in detail to compile all the research on going low carbohydrate in pregnancy. And I have a whole section in the book talking about the research, because anytime you even hint that you want to go low carb in pregnancy, you get all sorts of warnings from people. And I mean, I used to believe them myself. I'm trained in nutrition, and you don't want to do anything that's going to harm a growing baby. And so there are some older studies that suggested that if a woman goes low carb, she might go into ketosis, which is a state where your body is burning fat as fuel primarily instead of burning glucose from carbohydrates. And as a byproduct of burning fat, your body releases something called ketones. And there was some older research that suggested that babies born to moms who tested positive for ketones had lower IQ. Now, when you actually go back and look at the study, it's from the 70s. The study was done based on hospital nurses doing a single urine ketone test when the women were admitted to the hospital to deliver their babies. So we don't have any information about what they're eating. We don't know if they were experiencing ketosis throughout the pregnancy or not. Also, measuring urine ketones does not correlate with the blood levels of ketones, which is what actually matters. And what actually tells you if you're in ketosis or not. So there's many, many flaws with some of the older research. The rest of the research was looking at either women who were starving. So being in starvation, ketosis means your body is in ketosis because you're not eating enough carbohydrates, but you're also not getting enough of a variety of other essential nutrients, like proteins and vitamins and minerals and essential fatty acids and DHA and all these things that are important for a baby's development. So we can't use those to prove that ketosis is harmful because these women were deficient in all other sorts of stuff. And then the final ketosis issue is that it's usually compared to the rest of the studies are based on diabetic ketoacidosis, which is an entirely different state than the so-called nutritional ketosis a woman would have if she's eating low carb. And diabetic ketoacidosis occurs to people who have insulin-controlled diabetes, typically type 1 diabetes, who have somehow misdosed their insulin or skipped an insulin dose. Somehow they didn't take enough insulin. And if your body doesn't have any insulin, the only fuel it has available is to burn our fats and break down proteins and other things to release ketones. You don't even have any of the low-level insulin that a normal, healthy person has. And in that case, ketone levels go extremely high. They're 30-fold higher than what you'd see in nutritional ketosis. Blood sugar levels are also extremely high because your body just has the inability to take blood sugar or sugar out of your bloodstream. So usually blood sugar levels are in the 2, 3, 4, 500. Tends to be a little lower in pregnancy. But regardless, blood sugar is extremely high, and the acid-base balance in the body gets completely thrown off. It's extremely dangerous. It is associated with horrific birth defects, stillbirth, and all sorts of things. That is bad. A woman with gestational diabetes is not still has insulin in her body, right? Your insulin levels are usually 3 to 3.5 fold higher than when you're not pregnant. So unless you have pre-existing type 1 diabetes and have not taken your insulin levels or not taken your insulin doses, what you're going to experience when you go low carb with gestational diabetes is nutritional ketosis, which is a very low level of ketones. It's accompanied by normal levels of blood sugar, so you don't have that issue. The acid-base balance doesn't change in the body, and typically, if you're eating a real food diet, you're consuming all of the nutrients that a baby would need to properly grow. I won't even get into the rest of the issue on ketones because the fetal brain can use up to 30% of the energy of a baby's brain is actually supplied by ketones. There's even evidence that a baby's has the ability to produce its own ketones. So ketones itself aren't an issue. It's when they're in extraordinarily high amounts accompanied by all these other metabolic issues in a woman who has pre-existing diabetes and hasn't taken her insulin. That's not what you see with gestational diabetes at all.
Okay, so from what you're saying, the research out there used to suggest that women who followed a low-carb diet would be at risk for all of these serious complications. But when you delved into the research and actually took a look at it, you found that lowering carbohydrates just kind of lowers the blood sugar, and it might raise the ketones, but not to this exceedingly high level that would put the baby at risk. And from what you talked about earlier about the risks of having this extremely high blood sugar throughout the pregnancy and, you know, the baby having to produce insulin to try to field that, and then gaining extra weight, and then all the different complications that can happen after pregnancy, it sounds like it's kind of a best case scenario if you're able to control the blood sugar through diet. I think
Yes.
that, most women, I would imagine, because like you said, when you're pregnant, you're extra motivated to take care of babies. So I think most women would kind of jump at the opportunity to try the food thing first before having to go to medication.
Right. And most women really do. And then they're just given these odd warnings about ketones. So just to take that one step further on the ketone thing, a lot of not a lot, I mean, less doctors than previously, but still, many doctors recommend women check their ketone levels in addition to their blood sugar levels. And it's usually urine ketones. So you pee on this little keto stick and measure the ketone levels. But women can be spilling very high amounts of ketones in their urine and test negative in their bloodstream. So the urine ketone tests are really inaccurate. Even if a woman, so a lot of experts don't even recommend women check their ketone levels during pregnancy at all. But if, for example, somebody had pre-existing diabetes and tested and was requiring insulin and didn't take their insulin and they tested really high for urine ketones, even that isn't diagnostic of the harmful state diabetic ketoacidosis. They have to confirm it with a blood test that tests their ketones, that test their acid-base balance. So it's kind of a complicated issue, but you summed it up perfectly. Now, I will say we do have a study that was really interesting on a low glycemic index diet, which is not necessarily super low in carbs, but the carbohydrates they consume are in their whole form. So if they consumed grains, it was whole grains, meaning like 100% whole grains, not like that wheat bread that's all made of enriched flour. It was, eating whole fruit rather than juice. Juice raises the blood sugar very quickly because you don't have any fiber in them. So, and also when you combine carbohydrates with fats or proteins or fiber, any of those three, the glycemic index goes down. So on that type of diet, they found that the percentage of women requiring insulin dropped 50%. So that alone is enough to tell us, yes, we can do a lot more with food. And if we're given the go-ahead to, yes, you can go a little bit lower on carbohydrates, again, seeing where your blood sugar's at, so you're not unnecessarily restricting yourself, just enough that you get your blood sugar to normal, um, we'd be we'd prevent a lot of women from unnecessarily requiring medication. I do want to point out though that some women, no matter, and this is something I discuss in detail in the book, some women, no matter how much they cut out their carbohydrates, no matter how much they exercise, they're still not going to be able to get their blood sugar to normal. And that's where medication is a really wonderful thing because we have all these risks associated with high blood sugar, and you have this tool to lower them. Or if a woman doesn't want to cut her carbohydrates any lower, she feels better eating a certain way. And you know what? I'd rather take insulin along with this. As long as you understand how that food's affecting your blood sugar, you can really safely take insulin or some other medications without experiencing some of the harmful side effects, like the low blood sugar you can take if you don't match your carbohydrates to your insulin effectively, or the excessive weight gain. I mean, if you eat excessive amounts of carbohydrates and then take insulin to match it, remember, when insulin takes the sugar out of your bloodstream, it goes somewhere and your body converts it to fat. So, if we instead do the diet part first and then from there go to the different medications, then we'll prevent a lot of women from having the unnecessary side effects like the unnecessary weight gain or frequent low blood sugar or some of these other issues. We can also keep the dosages a lot more modest. I mean, if you control mostly with diet and exercise, you will simply need lower doses of those medications, and that's a good thing.
I think that's a really good point that you're making because I feel like it's addressing kind of the root cause because this blood sugar stuff is based on what we're putting into our bodies. It's not, I mean, to a large extent, but that's what it is. You eat food and then your body has to deal with the food. So that's where this blood sugar is coming from. And so if we're kind of addressing the problem at the root cause, just like you said, if a woman doesn't want to change her carbohydrate intake, just take more insulin, that's kind of a band-aid. And like you said, it has to go somewhere. So I think it's a really good approach to actually address the root cause. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you for the women listening who are not, who take their AC1 test, A1C, close, the A1C test, and, they don't have gestational diabetes. I always think because I've made lots of changes in my diet in the last few years, but I used to be like a sugar fiend, like the gummy bear girl. Like it was really bad, actually. Like I was always slender, but I don't know why, given all the sugar I used to eat. So I guess my question is kind of like, how does this information apply to all women? And why should all of us be mindful of, spiking our blood sugar all the time? Because I feel like it's really important, obviously, if you have gestational diabetes for your baby, but I feel like a lot of the things we're talking about could impact all of us to some extent.
Yes, it's wise for everybody, really, because big swings in blood sugar are associated with quite a bit of inflammation in the body. So, and inflammation is related to almost every degenerative disease that we have to us. So, big blood sugar swings, just at the simplest form, can make us have a lot of food cravings, usually for more sugary things. It can change our the bacteria levels that are naturally in our gut, leading to something called gut dysbiosis, or it's basically just digestive problems because we have been feeding bad bacteria lots and lots of sugar. So you might get bloating and gas and diarrhea, or maybe even infections. Sugar depresses our immune system, so that's not a great thing. I don't know if you've heard that people with diabetes have a higher risk of certain infections, like they have to be really careful about wound care. That's because having high sugar in your bloodstream, it's feeding the bad bacteria that are, at the root of that infection, and they're also inhibiting the action of the immune system. So it's not great to have super high blood sugar. It can also lead to, changes in weight. Like for you, for example, He didn't seem to have that problem, and different people have differing tolerance to carbohydrates. And, if you're really active, you can usually tolerate more carbohydrates without higher blood sugar. Exercise naturally lowers your insulin resistance. Those muscles are using glucose for energy. And if you're consistently eating a certain amount of carbs, our body's insulin levels will kind of increase to match it. Except if you go a little bit too high for too long, eventually the pancreas can get a little bit tired. And they call it beta cell failure, where that's when you start to get the early signs of prediabetes, where despite your body consistently pumping out high amounts of insulin, at a certain point your body stops responding to it, and you get insulin resistance, and you get the early signs of prediabetes and diabetes. So I think there's, everyone tolerates a differing amount of carbohydrates, but I generally tend to think that if we're, making sure that we get enough of our good sources of fat and protein first, and our non-starchy veggies and our nuts and seeds and those other whole foods, then we just don't get such a high proportion of the carbs taken over our diet. It's just really convenient to jump for like a pasta meal or a big serving of rice and a teeny bit of something else to go with it. It's cheap and it's fast and it's easy. It's just not the best for our bodies. The other thing I want to just point out really quickly on the pregnancy front is that there is some interesting research on these large babies, the macrosomic babies. And it actually turns out that quite a high percentage of babies who are born large are actually not born to women who have gestational diabetes. Plus, even women with gestational diabetes who meet the blood sugar targets that their doctors set, they don't always prevent having a large baby at birth. And when they've actually looked at what is a normal woman's blood sugar during birth, it's usually around 20 points if we're doing, and it might be different in Canada, but in the States we do milligrams per deciliter. They might do millimoles per liter over there. So the you'd have to do the conversion. But if we're doing milligrams per deciliter, like just for example, fasting woman's blood sugar, a woman's fasting blood sugar if she has gestational diabetes is usually at a goal of less than 90 milligrams per deciliter. But when they've looked at normal pregnant women who don't have any associated diabetes or other issues, the average blood sugar is around 70 fasting. And so there's some talk about, should we change the target blood sugar? Should we be diagnosing gestational diabetes more stringently because perhaps we're missing it with our current screening guidelines? And I just believe that every woman can benefit from learning how food affects our blood sugar, even if it's at the simplest level of how soon am I hungry after I eat? How much energy do I have during the day? Because a lot of times it's as simple as, if your energy is really low or you're starving or craving a lot of sugar, you're probably overeating on the carbohydrates and not eating enough fat and protein to sustain you. Either that, or you're just purely under eating and just not eating enough food at all. I mean, that's another thing. But a lot of times it's the balance of nutrients that people are getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like this can be beneficial, or not can be, but is beneficial for all women who are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant. Just given the really negative results of having high blood sugar and raising your risk of having gestational diabetes. So yeah, no, I think that's I think it's something that all women should be aware of, and I feel like it's sound advice anyways. I've talked a lot about nutrition and pregnancy on this podcast, and I've interviewed some fantastic guests, and we've talked a lot about nutrition. And the common threads that keep coming up are, healthy fats, protein, and among a lot of other things, of course,
Right.
DHA, fish oil, all those types of things. But the common threads that keep coming up are kind of don't be afraid of eating fat because it's really important. And
Right.
and I think, throwing in too much sugar is also bad.
Right.
Maybe
I mean, really, it's
put down the
about,
Coca-Cola
yes,
a little
definitely
bit.
that for sure. And yeah, it's really about emphasizing foods that are most nutrient dense. And it turns out that our especially our animal foods, our meats, especially the fatty meats, tough cuts of meats, organ meats, eggs with the yolks, full fat dairy products, vegetables, whole fruit, um, even if you eat legumes, those are actually pretty low glycemic. They're half of the carbohydrates in there come from fiber anyways. Nuts and seeds, those foods all provide way more nutrition per amount of food than pasta, white rice, white bread, pure sugar, soda, cereals, even if they're fortified. So it's like we may as well sort of tip the balance onto let's emphasize these really, really good foods. If that happens to help you have normal blood sugar, fantastic. If you're a normal pregnant woman, if you have gestational diabetes, you have, even more of a reason to focus on them.
Mm-hmm. And instead of kind of filling the trough just to eat to make yourself full, because
Right.
I think that's how it works in our culture. Because I remember feeling that way, like hunger was annoying, so you eat so that you're not hungry anymore, and then you're done.
Yeah.
And I feel like the shift is starting to happen where instead of just eating just to get rid of the hunger, we have to
Yeah.
eat for nutrition. So eating the most nutritious foods, filling our body with nutrients instead of just filling our body, period, end of story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. I took a trip to Thailand a few years back, and um, I generally don't eat a whole bunch of grains, even lower now than back then. But when you're in a country that's much less food secure than you're used to, I mean, the pile of rice was astronomical. By the end of the trip, my husband and I were eating loads of rice. Because you don't want to waste food. I mean, that's rude and wasteful and whatever, but you sort of just get accustomed to it that like when you sit down to a meal, you just sort of like pack in as much food as possible. And if you're used to, say, having cereal or having rice and being hungry 30 minutes later, then like, yeah, you kind of want to stuff in as much as you can so you're not hungry as soon. And the interesting thing is if we again tip that balance back to the more nutrient dense foods, slightly lower concentration of carbs, we fill up faster on a smaller volume of food. Just fat has, more than double the quantity of calories per a smaller volume of food. So you don't have to walk around bloated or super stuffed or feeling awful because you've shoved in a ton of carbs. You can actually eat what appears to be a smaller quantity of food and be really satisfied and really energized and feel really good. And
And
that's
for
something that,
longer. I have to throw that in there. And for
yes, for
longer.
long.
All
And
right.
it
Well,
takes a while to get used to. It's a little weird, and especially if you're not used to consuming fat, a lot of people can be a little bit concerned. Is it going to be bad for me? And we won't even get into that, but no, it's not going to be bad for you. It's going
no.
to be good for you, but it takes a little adjusting to be like, it's okay to have butter. It's okay to put extra olive oil on my salad. It's okay to have, however many nuts I'm hungry for at this snack. That's okay.
And it won't make you fat. And
It
that's
won't
the
make you
thing.
fat.
Because I know I was recently talking to a girlfriend about this, and she was actually asking me a bunch of questions. She heard I was doing the podcast and, all crazy with nutrition and all this. So she was asking me what I'm doing, and she's pregnant, and, we were talking about all that. And anyway, so I was telling her about what I eat and the fat and everything. And the first question out of her mouth is, wasn't that going to make me fat? So we still have a long ways to go, I think, with this conversation about nutrition.
We do. Yes.
Well, so to kind of to tie up the interview today, I just have a couple of questions that I'll ask kind of to close it out. And the first question I wanted to ask you is, what would you say is the biggest or one of the biggest myths about nutrition for conception and pregnancy?
Oh gosh, myths around conception nutrition. I could take this in many different directions, but yeah, I'll choose this one. I'll choose this one. Um, and it's not specifically food related, but supplement related. A lot of women are told that they need to take folic acid or eat lots of cereal that's fortified with folic acid because that's going to help prevent neural tube defects. That's all fine and good because, on a large scale, that does help a lot of women, except that quite a high number of women, between 40 to 60% of the population, can't use the synthetic form of folic acid. We have to get the stuff that naturally occurs in food. So don't go shoving down the refined grain products to meet your folic acid needs. It's far healthier to get the true, real form of folate from green leafy vegetables, meats, especially organ meats like liver if you like them. That's one of the most concentrated sources. Eggs with the yolks, because all the folate and the associated choline, which does similar things in the body, that's all in the yolks. If you eat legumes, those are another good source. Nuts and seeds. Try to get it from real food instead of going for some fortified product, because the natural stuff that's found in food is always better.
Okay. And this one, I'll ask this one as well. I think we've talked about a lot of it, but just to kind of close out the interview today, what would you say is the most common myth or misconception about food or diet or health in general that you would like to see corrected? I mean, I guess with a relation to fertility as well.
It is definitely the fat misconception. Fat does not make you fat. Fat supplies a lot of necessary nutrients for the growing baby. Or even keeping your eggs healthy if we're talking fertility nutrition, because all of our hormones at the end of the day are made from fatty substances and cholesterol containing things. They're steroid hormones. They have a cholesterol base. So we want to be eating fatty foods, and that includes fatty animal foods. So eggs, grass-fed beef with the fat, the organs if you like them, tough cuts of meat. If you're making, bone broth or stock, don't skim off the fat at the end. You want to use that. Don't pat off your bacon and take all the grease out. You want the grease. It's good for you. Saturated fat is really good for you. It's really helpful for fertility. They've done some studies specifically on dairy fat, and women who eat low-fat dairy have lower fertility compared to women who eat full-fat dairy. I mean, it's no surprise. There's lots of good stuff in fat. So if I could see that corrected, specifically the incorrect notion that saturated fat is bad for you, that would make my life so much easier. And I think it would actually probably improve the fertility rates across the country, because there's still a whole bunch of people who believe that all you need to do to be healthy is cut out your saturated fats and eat more vegetable oils. And unfortunately, the vegetable oils are really highly inflammatory in the body and are working against your fertility. For a variety of reasons other than just the types of fats that they have, they're not helpful for fertility. So if I could see that corrected, man, life would be good.
Yeah, I think that would make life easier for a lot of people. Everyone, really. Well, Lily, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for being so generous with your time. For all the listeners, the book is Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. And so if anything that we talked about today resonated with you, if you've been diagnosed with gestational diabetes, or if you run out to your doctor to get the blood test and find out that it's something that you need to be concerned about, make sure to check it out. I'm excited to read it. I didn't get an opportunity to read it just yet, but I'm looking forward to taking a peek as well. So I'll be linking to that in the show notes. And so, Lily, how can the listeners get in touch with you if they want to work with you or to find out more information about what you do?
Sure. Well, my main website and very active blog are at pilatesnutritionist.com. I have a variety of freebies. There's at the top, there's a little freebies download. And so there's 4 different ebooks that I have up there for free related to a variety of different things from weight loss to digestive things, prenatal snacks, a guide on how to make vegetables taste good for the veggie haters out there. They can get any of those. And by downloading one of those, you'll automatically receive a weekly email update from me. The other thing is if you want to get the book and get information specifically about gestational diabetes, you can go to the book website, which is realfood4gd.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again, Lily. It was a lot of fun recording with you.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, I would love it if you shared it with a friend and helped to spread the word. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, just search for Fertility Friday on iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, there are some amazing episodes coming up with some fantastic guests, so you definitely won't want to miss it. And if you're loving the show, if you're enjoying the episodes, please stop by on iTunes, find Fertility Friday podcast, and leave a review. A 5-star review would be awesome, but leave an honest review. Let me know how I'm doing, and that will help more people find the show. And as for me, you can find me on Twitter at Fertile Friday. You can stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes for today's episode. And you'll find today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/Lily. And of course, you can also find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook page, which is facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.